Welcome everybody to tonight's episode of Embracing the Moment. I'm Pastor Joe Ericoli, Discipleship and Associate Pastor here at Genesis Church, and it's great to have you tuning in with us this evening. We have been journeying this whole summer through a series on biblical justice. Early on in this series, we took a look biblically, theologically, from God's Word. What does He have to say about justice? And then if you've been following with us, we've been taking each segment and kind of picking a different broad category, and this is not exhaustive. This series is not exhaustive. We're just scratching the surface, but picking a different category to kind of dive deep on and drill down in and really get at the heart of it. How does God care about this? Where are injustices that He might be inviting us into to be a source of justice and care on whatever topic we might be discussing? So tonight's episode, as we continue the series, is going to be on justice and care for immigrants. And with me this evening is Ashly Galuppo. So Ashly, welcome.
Thank you so much for having me.
It's wonderful to have you here, so thanks for joining us. So you're new to the Genesis family, and that is because you've married into the family.
I have.
So for those of you who are part of the Genesis family, and you know who our AV and video guy is, that's Michael Galuppo. This is Michael's new wife. So congratulations on your new marriage.
Thank you so much.
And it's wonderful to have you here at Genesis.
My pleasure. And It's been definitely my pleasure.
Yeah, so wonderful. So as we kind of talked before this conversation, Ashly was sharing with me her heart and her passion for this subject. And so you have an education background as an educational leader, and you have a heart and desire and a passion for working with students who are immigrants. So can you tell us a little bit about your story, your personal story? Maybe you can expand on this educational piece as well, and help us understand how do those things connect with our topic this evening?
Absolutely. So I was born and raised in the Dominican Republic.
Okay.
I came to the United States when I was about 13 years of age, so about 16 years at this point.
Okay.
I was privileged and blessed enough that my father had been living in the U.S. for a bit prior to us coming here. So me coming as a minor, it gave me the privilege, since my dad was already a citizen. I came in already as a citizen myself.
Gotcha. Okay.
Due to being a minor. But just that aspect of culture shock.
There was none of that though, right?
There was a lot of that. But I think that one of the main reasons as to why I'm so passionate about the educational aspect of things is because when I came, since my family was already preparing to us moving here, there was a lot of preparation over the years where I was studying English a lot prior to coming here. But once I came here, normally there is a process of students, or at least I came to New Jersey. Every state is different.
Okay.
So in New Jersey, normally there is a process of testing the students to be able to see what level of English they are, what kind of assistance or resources they need in order for them to be successful.
Okay.
They gave me those tests, and I was a little bit too advanced to what they were used to, so I was kind of spread out, but they made sure that I still had that sense of ELL support, at least on an advanced level. And it made me, over the years, I've been able to realize that sense of support was more because of that cultural shock than anything else, but it gave me the ability for me to be able to see other people's processes in matters of immigration. So many other students who were not as privileged as me, who did not know as much English as I did.
Okay.
And because of that, then now being in the higher education field for over 6 years at this point.
So vocationally speaking.
I have been working with immigrant, predominantly Hispanic students. And from many different backgrounds and many different processes. But because of that, I have been exposed to many aspects of what is that justice and care that is needed for immigrants, and how sometimes because of the lack of understanding, we don't understand the struggles and the hurdles that they experience throughout their process.
Yeah, that's really helpful. And for clarity's sake, you said ELL?
Yes. So
and what does that stand for?
So it's normally English learning.
Okay.
Normally, individuals tend to use it as ESL, which is English
Right.
second language.
Yeah, okay.
However, they're trying to move towards, mainly higher education is trying to move towards ELL instead of the second language. More of
Okay.
an English learning concept.
Okay.
Yeah.
Okay, yeah, that's helpful.
Yeah.
Okay, wonderful, wonderful. So can you describe a little bit about the complexities of, you've used this word now a few times, the processes for different students depending on where, what country they're coming from and immigrating to the United States. Can you kind of expand a little bit on what are the complexities without taking us too deep into the weeds? So keep it a little broad and general, and yet at the same time help us get some nuance on this, because I feel like I'm just going to speak for me. I need some nuance on this. I need
Yes.
some better understanding. So
Absolutely.
can you help me out?
Yeah, absolutely. So every individual tends to, I mean, we know that an immigrant is somebody who has decided to permanently live in a foreign country, right?
Right.
But many times we tend to think that everyone is illegal, right? And that is not correct, given the fact that depending on each stage that someone may be. So for example, there are so many different kinds of visas that
Okay.
individuals may be in. There might be individuals who fall under a DACA status, which is deferred action for childhood. Someone that has come to the United States as a child,
Okay.
but their parents may not necessarily be legal.
Gotcha.
Right?
Okay.
Their processes may be completely different. There are individuals who are residents, right? And then there are then individuals who are citizens, right? Who are still immigrants, but they're citizens. So depending on each stage or each status that they may be, their
Yeah.
process is likely to be really different.
Interesting. So when you say to the point where some are citizens, in my mind I hear that, I'm thinking, okay, isn't the process wrapped up?
The process is wrapped up.
Okay.
However, they may have, for example, a double status of citizenship. So, for
Okay.
example, I am a double citizenship. I am a citizen in the United States, but I am also a citizen in the Dominican Republic.
Okay.
Because I was
okay.
born
so
and
dual
raised there.
citizenship. Yeah.
Dual citizenship.
Okay.
But that individual is still classified as an immigrant, just citizen of the United States, if that makes sense.
Okay. Yeah. No, that does make sense. And you're jogging my memory here, because this is a while ago. Probably, and I think I shared you a little bit about this as we were chatting before recording. This was maybe 8-9 years ago when I was part of a previous church that was part of an established denomination. When we went to annual conference that year, and it was a 3-day conference, they had a whole separate workshop and lecture and teaching on immigration, because it was a denomination that had high populations of immigrants coming to local congregations within it. And I remember I sat down for, I don't know, 1 or 2 of the lectures and quickly realized that I knew nothing. I had these preconceived ideas about what this was supposed to be, and it was just it was much more complex than I had ever heard anybody attempt to articulate to me. Now, some of that's on me. I'm not blaming other people for that. Some of that's on me. But that was very eye-opening. And as someone who, my story is very different. My grandfather on my mother's side, he immigrated to the United States when he was 16 from Italy. And his mom actually came over to the United States to have my grandfather. So he's born in the United States and then immediately gets back on the boat and goes back to Italy with the plan that someday, because now he has dual citizenship, someday he could come over.
Right.
So growing up, I was very close to him, and so hearing his stories of how challenging it was, and he didn't even have to go through all of the complexities that you're alluding to, and still how challenging that was for him to assimilate into and get acclimated into a new culture, to the point where now, here I am a couple generations later, and I just take all this for granted. I don't think much about it.
Yeah.
So can you help us understand how can we seek justice and care for immigrants? And obviously you're speaking from your own perspective on this one. But what are some things that you see that we specifically, especially for us as Jesus followers, because God's word actually has a lot to say about
Yes.
caring for the immigrants and caring for the foreigners, and caring for those who are assimilating into a new culture. So yeah, can you speak to that?
So the first Bible verse that automatically comes to my mind, it's Hosea 4:6. It is where it is stated, my people perish due to lack of knowledge, right? And it is because of the fact that we need to be willing to understand and educate ourselves, or ask, like not automatically just assume or judge, but rather being willing to ask, what does it mean to be an immigrant in the United States?
Yeah, right. That's a great question.
There are just so many layers that immigrants tend to go through, that once you start diving into that, you get to that sense of being able to follow what the word tells us in terms of caring for immigrants. So for me, I personally say, right now, I think that there isn't that 100% sense of justice and care because we lack the knowledge that we need. And many times we lack that knowledge because we are not willing to allow people or allow institutions and organizations that are already established to give us that information in order for us to understand what our neighbors may be going through.
Yeah, that's helpful. That's helpful. How has your experience, you shared this with me again, I keep alluding back to our conversation, our pre-conversation, right before this conversation that you're joining us on. You had mentioned about the work that your father has done. Would you like to share kind of any of that and maybe how that's kind of shaped your views on this topic?
Absolutely. So as I mentioned, I have been really privileged enough to not necessarily experience many of the hurdles of an immigrant firsthand, but I have been able to experience the hurdles of immigrants secondhand. And one of the ways that I've been able to do that is my father is the president of a non-for-profit organization called the Dominican House of Hazleton. So it's located in Hazleton, Pennsylvania.
Okay.
And he actually is a liaison for the Dominican Republic for immigrants here in the United States. But at the same time, he assists immigrants from many other different countries. It doesn't necessarily have to be a Dominican. Because of that, I have been able to see him deal with many of the law aspects of it. And like I said, depending on which status that individual may find themselves, they may have to deal with a lot of courts and a lot of hearings and things like that, and so many applications. It takes a while for you to be able to get to that stage of, okay, I'm done. My process is done.
Months, years?
For some individuals, it takes years for them to be able to accomplish this. And not only the aspect of time, but then you also think of the financial aspect of it. You have to pay lawyers.
See, that was going to be my next question. Who's paying for this? Who does the burden fall on?
Correct. So the non-for-profit, for example, my father's non-for-profit organization, or the one that he leads, it tries to serve as much as they can financially to make sure that because they have connections with different lawyers and stuff like that, that these lawyers are able to do some of their pro bono work.
Okay.
And as a result, then these individuals don't have to feel as much of the burden, but that doesn't necessarily mean that the whole process is going to be taken care of.
Sure, especially if you're talking years.
Correct.
And then the time. I'm just thinking practically, right, as a young dad with a family and a job and doing school, I wouldn't have time. You're talking. You said courts, plural. Dates, plural, that you need to go through. Finances, plural. This isn't just a one-time event, and I go and I give them my paperwork and I'm good.
And here's another reason why. I look at immigration as similar to the medical field, where you never finish learning, and there may just be new processes that come along, new requirements that come along. So let's say that you started off the process this way, but then there are new regulations that come in the process that you started. You now have to then deviate towards that new process that has been established.
Okay. So you have people who are going through different processes And then my understanding is, and I think you might have already alluded to this, those processes might look different depending on the country
Correct.
that the individual is coming from.
Yes.
Okay, and that has to do, I'm a novice at this, that has to do with the relationship between the United States and that particular country?
Correct.
And then there's the changes that can happen legally along the way.
Correct.
Okay.
Yes, that's pretty much
This
what
is
it all comes
complex.
down to. It is really complex, and that's why I always say to individuals, just try to take the time to be able to learn about it, and just learn a little bit and ask. You never lose anything by asking. There was something that I heard or that I read recently on the internet, and it was someone's accent. When you hear someone with an accent, look at it as the presence of bravery.
Uh-huh.
And
That's
if we start looking at it in that sense rather than a judgmental aspect of things, I think that we would be more willing to ask individuals a little bit about their processes and just being more understanding of it.
Yeah, that's good. That's a good word. Yeah. That's good advice.
Yeah, thank
So
you.
we've been talking about the processes. Can you share a little bit, as much detail as you'd like? You mentioned, if I recall correctly, that your journey coming to the United States was a bit different in that you didn't have to go through the same level of processes. But you did mention the culture shock piece. And I have to believe, now I have my grandfather in the back of my mind thinking about stories that he shared with me growing up, that's not only to you, that's not an isolated event, right?
Right.
What is the culture shock like? I mean, I moved one time when I was a child, and it was within the state of Pennsylvania, and that was culture shock for me. So, yeah, can you just help us understand what was that experience like for you, and then what are the correlations that you've seen in the immigrant population that you work with?
Yeah, absolutely. So I think one of the first things that I can say right off the bat would be just trying to find that state or middle ground where I felt like things were relatable to me. I couldn't find that right off the bat,
Okay.
right? Even though I understood the language, I was able to interact with individuals, still my primary language is Spanish. So for me, there would be, I mentioned to my husband all the time, there are certain jokes and certain things that I cannot translate in English because they don't make sense. So even that
understand
aspect
that
of it, I mean, I love to laugh. So I'm always kind of like finding ways to joke around. So
Yeah.
in my primary language is like, how can I even project
Whoa.
this funny joke?
Wow.
I can't, right? So how can I make friends that way? I don't know. I just can't. So for me, what helped me find that level ground for things being relatable was sports.
Okay.
So I love sports. I used to play baseball and volleyball back home. I mean, baseball is our main sport.
I was going to say, yeah.
So I used to play baseball with guys and volleyball back home. And then I just started playing volleyball here and have played all throughout even my college years. So that helped me find that middle ground.
Gotcha.
For me, it only took me about a year and a half to find that middle ground.
Wow.
There are certain people that it takes them even longer, depending on, them not being able to communicate, them not feeling as relatable, and just finding, like I mentioned, that ESL or ELL class that they gave me, it helped me be surrounded by individuals who were of my culture.
Yeah.
In such a way that, okay, you're not just out there on your own.
Right.
But now, if you think about it, I always think of individuals that come as adults, they immigrate as adults. How do they get to find that bridge? It's really difficult for them to have that bridge because they're automatically thinking of, I need to work, I need to provide for my family.
Yeah.
Well, what if you don't know the language? How can you even interact with the individuals around you? And what it comes down to survival. So I have a lot of students who have learned just certain aspects of English based on just street talking and what they hear their coworkers say, and they just use those main words to be able to speak. But because of that, you find a lot of them then feeling really homesick because...
Yeah, or lonely. I mean, I would imagine it has to be really, really challenging.
Absolutely, yeah.
What was the role that your faith, and maybe if you were part of one, your local church played in helping you along in this process?
Absolutely, and that's actually a great question. So when I came in, I mean, I've been born and raised in the church, so really strong based foundation of what faith is all about, or my faith. But when I came to the U.S., it was like, okay, where do I go to church?
Okay.
And I remember my sister and I just like trying to find a church where we could feel comfortable church-wise because of still that culture shock.
Wow.
And we were privileged enough to finding different churches in our community where they were Hispanic. So the
Gotcha.
majority of the preaching and the devotion of things would be in Spanish, because that's another thing. Like, for example, I was born and raised in the church in Dominican Republic. So still now, I mainly read the word in Spanish, right?
Makes sense.
Even when I pray, like I've been in the United States for 16 years, and even when I pray, I feel more confident speaking to God in Spanish sometimes than in English, right? But my faith, I think that helped me throughout that process. Just holding on to the idea that God was in control. God was in control of my process. God was in control of this new transition. And Jesus himself was an immigrant. So
It was. And that sometimes can be overlooked, depending on what faith tradition you're part of.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Absolutely. So just having him as an example and just having that in my mind, I think helped me be a little more brave and courageous in trying different things to make sure that I was growing as a person, I was growing as a citizen. And at the same time, throughout the years, also making sure that I was paving the way and building bridges for those immigrants who may be struggling more than I even struggled.
And how has that carried over into your current vocation?
So it has carried on a lot. So I, before moving to New York now, for about 6 years, I worked for a Hazleton Center campus for the institution that I work for right now.
Gotcha.
They have moved me into an online position now.
Thank you, pandemic.
Thank you, pandemic.
Okay.
But because of that passion, the reason as to why they brought me on board was to help the Hispanic community, those immigrants around the Hazleton community, right?
Okay, so that's a particular group of people who are coming to Hazleton?
Correct.
If I'm tracking with you?
Yes. So from a certain time to now, over the years, the Hispanic population has grown significantly in the Hazleton area and surrounding areas as well. So Lackawanna College is the college that I work for right now. They have a campus in Hazleton, and they were trying to find a way as to how to best serve that community, right?
Sure.
And every immigrant or every culture sometimes tends to need that gatekeeper, if that makes sense.
Yeah.
That's the way that we tend to
Well, someone
talk
who they
about
can
it.
relate to.
Correct.
Yeah.
So as I was brought on board, one of the main things that we automatically started doing was translating financial aid information, giving Spanish presentations, and building then the bridges that are needed educationally speaking or academically speaking for individuals to become college students.
Right.
So a lot of them would feel threatened about just the aspect of college in another country.
Goodness, yeah. I mean, I'm thinking just about moving, let alone now you're going to do higher education.
Correct.
And
And just the system overall in the United States and just different, other countries, academically speaking, is so different.
Well, yeah.
Even
Yes,
if you
yes.
have been in college in your other country.
Right,
you know?
right.
So I was able to be a part of a team that led developing the ELL bridges in college, then developmental bridges, to then fundamental bridges, to then make sure that they were successful college-wise.
Okay.
And aside from that, just having those solid conversations with immigrant parents in terms of understanding how the education system in the United States works. And obviously, you know, for them to feel comfortable in letting their child just be successful overall, it's just easier for them to understanding in their native language.
Of course.
So that has been majority of the work that I have been working over the years, and we have definitely seen significant change in the community in terms of just getting out there and getting an education.
Yeah. Wow, that's good. That's really good. So these are tangible examples of care.
Yes,
for
absolutely.
this very important population of people. So I'm clock watching here because this is. I feel like I say this. So sorry if I sound like a broken record. If you've been tuning in to each episode, I feel like I say this every single episode this series. It's like, well, I think we solved it all in this short conversation. No, it's just it helps me. I find this so helpful because there's so much complexity, so much nuance, and yet that doesn't mean that we go, oh well, it's just so it's too complicated to get involved in. But rather, no, here's some practical ways, here's some tangible ways. So as we're kind of landing the plane on this conversation, I have so many things swirling around in my head right now. I have obviously what's sitting right in front of me, God's Word. We've spoken about God's Word and alluded to it in this particular episode, but thinking specifically about God's vision for His family is global. And sometimes, depending on the context that we live in or the tradition that we've been handed, we can forget that. And we can almost have an exclusionary approach to our faith, whether it be our brand of faith or our people who practice the faith. And that's just not what we see here. In fact, Paul really breaks this down in the book of Ephesians when he talks about how Christ has broken down that dividing wall between Jews and non-Jews, and his vision for his family is truly global. And then we see this in the new heavens and the new earth and our resurrected bodies, where we're worshiping Jesus, the multi-ethnic kingdom of God.
Yes.
Right? And that's just one aspect of his kingdom family, but it's important for this conversation. And then I have also in my mind thinking about the most recent census data that's been released and the changes and the shifts across our nation broadly, but then each locality. I mean, you've talked about Hazleton. We could even talk about York here and the changes that we're seeing. So all of those things kind of in the background as I ask this last question. But what are some simple ways for me, for those of us tuning in to this conversation, for local churches? What are ways for us as Jesus followers to seek care and justice for immigrants as we round this out? Because you've already talked about several ways.
Yes.
But kind of closing thoughts on that question.
Yeah, absolutely. The first thing that I can say, and this may be just because of my previous background in mental health, the first thing is just make sure that you have those willing listening ears. Being able to...
And you're talking about my ears.
Yes.
When you say your ears, you're not talking about the other people.
Well, their ears. Your ears too. Just be willing to listen to other people's stories. And then there's so many other different resources out there. The main resource that I can say is the USCIS website. That is... USCIS.
CIS.
Yes.
Okay.
So that is the United States Citizenship and Immigration Services website.
Okay.
So that website normally is the website that all individuals have to go through in terms of all the applications, all the forms that they have to go through depending on the visas, their residency status that they may be under. But it just gives you some kind of idea of the step-by-step process that those individuals may be going through.
Wow. Okay.
And then just look at your surrounding areas. Like I said, I'm new in York, so I'm not that familiarized. But there are some resources in York and in different surrounding areas. I believe the Pennsylvania Resource Center, there is one here in York, where they do serve these individuals, and they do serve these individuals even who may be in prison, who are immigrants and so forth. Just have an idea or check out some of the information that may be around the organizations and institutions that are already in place. But lastly, just don't be afraid to stop learning about other people's hurdles, other people's processes in their lives.
Yeah, that's really helpful.
Yeah, thank you.
Thank you. So thanks for joining me in this conversation. This was enlightening. And I'm just going to speak for myself, really helped me to begin to understand the nuance that is involved in this particular topic. And thanks so much for giving us some really practical tips here.
Thank you so much for having me. It has been my pleasure to be here.
Well, wonderful. Well, thank you guys for tuning in with us this evening. Hope you kind of had similar takeaways as I did for this conversation. And be praying, as I always encourage you, be praying about ways that God might be inviting you to seek justice and provide care for this particular group of people who are immigrants, who are new to the United States, or in that sometimes long process of becoming a citizen. We look forward to seeing you in our next conversation and hope you have a great rest of your night.